This is the map of the United States, and this is the map of Brazil. Take a good look. In terms of territory, the difference between them is minimal. The United States has about 9.8 million square kilometers, and Brazil has 8.5 million square kilometers. Two huge continental countries full of remote regions, geographical challenges, and completely distinct landscapes. But now comes the part that really shocks you. When we switch from the political map to the railway map, the similarity disappears. In the United States, the tracks form a gigantic tangle, covering practically the entire country. There are more than 140,000 kilometers of railways connecting the East Coast, the West Coast, the Great Plains, industrial regions, agricultural areas, deserts, and mountains. The network is so dense that, from above, it resembles a metallic web stitching the country together. Now look at Brazil's map. The contrast is striking. Our railway network, adding everything up, doesn't exceed 30,000 kilometers, and a large part of it is still disconnected, abandoned, or operating far below its potential. Two huge countries, two countries with almost the same size, but two completely different stories about how railways transform a nation. Why did Americans build so much while we built so little? The answer seems simple, but what comes next reveals political, economic, geographic, and cultural decisions that shaped the destiny of both countries. Because in the end, tracks are not just tracks. They show how each nation decided to grow and what it prioritized along the way. And to understand this difference, we need to go back in time and find out how all of this happened. To understand why the United States and Brazil took different paths, we need to go back to the 19th century, when the world was discovering the power of the steam locomotive. It was a time of expansion, of open frontiers, of cities springing up on the map, and economies being born through industrialization. And it was precisely at that moment that two countries began to write their railroad histories, but with completely different choices. In the United States, the railroad was more than transportation. It drove nation building. The country was young, divided into states, and lacking efficient connections. To integrate all of this, the government adopted an aggressive strategy. It created laws that encouraged private companies to build railroads. It offered land in exchange for each kilometer of track installed and stimulated an expansion race that seemed endless. The logic was simple. Each track put a new city on the map, increased land value, boosted exports, and connected the countryside to the coast. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, 19th century Brazil was experiencing a different reality. Instead of a rising industrial economy, we had an agrarian economy based on coffee, sugar, and products exported through a few strategic ports. Regional elites were powerful, decentralized, and had specific interests. That's why the first Brazilian railways were short, isolated, connecting farms to ports, instead of connecting cities to each other. The tracks served exportation, not national integration. From that point on, the story started to diverge even more. In the United States, railroads joined a national project. The government saw uniting the country as key for security, commerce, and westward expansion. That's why a combined investment model emerged. Private capital plus government support. That's how colossal projects like the Union Pacific and Central Pacific began, crossing snowy mountains, hot deserts, and terrain many thought impossible. The whole country united, believing the railroad was the future. In Brazil, that vision never existed. Here, the government invested little and left almost everything in the hands of foreign concessionaires. There was no national plan, no integration. Each railway section belonged to a different company, with no standardization, no coordination, and, most importantly, no strategy to unite the country. And when the government tried to intervene, bureaucracy and lack of continuity held everything back. Another crucial point was the historical moment when the United States was accelerating its railway expansion. They were consolidating their industrial revolution. Cities were growing, factories were emerging, ports were expanding, And there was demand for trains, for passengers, for cargo, for everything. In Brazil, industrialization began decades later, and in a much more timid way. By the time we finally gained industrial momentum, in the 20th century, the world was already entering the automobile era, and priorities had changed. But there's something even deeper in this comparison. In the United States, railroads were symbols of progress, freedom, and expansion. They're present in movies, books, and Western stories. They were tracks that led to a new world, to newly founded cities, to opportunities. American society grew up with the idea that the train represented the future. In Brazil, however, the tracks became associated with regional interests, monoculture, exportation, and later, abandonment. The population never saw the railroad as a main player because it was never presented that way. And without social pressure, successive governments stopped investing, while road transportation became dominant. When we compare them side by side, we notice something simple but powerful. The United States used the railroads to build a country, while Brazil tried to use them only to transport goods. And this difference in vision changed the entire following century. The story doesn't stop there. What happened in the following decades is even more revealing. Guy explains why one country's path led to the largest railway network in the world, while the other got stuck with trucks. When we look at the history of railways in the United States, it becomes clear that they didn't grow by chance. The gigantic network we see today is the result of strategic decisions, coordinated investments, and, above all, a very clear national vision to integrate the country, no matter the cost. And this mindset began to directly influence the way the tracks were built. In the United States, each railroad was part of a bigger plan. When a company wanted to build a line crossing the countryside, the government not only allowed it, but also encouraged it. And it wasn't just symbolic encouragement. It was millions of hectares distributed through the famous land grants, land offered for every kilometer of track laid. These territories were worth gold because they would be sold, divided, and turned into new cities along the railroad. In other words, it was a perfect cycle. The more tracks, the more cities, the more cities, the more economy, and the more economy, the more tracks. This created a railroad race with companies competing over routes, construction speeds, and even who would be the first to cross certain regions. The result of this was monumental works like the Transcontinental Railroad, which connected the East Coast to the West Coast, in just 6 years crossing deserts, snowy peaks, and deep valleys. No matter the challenge, there was capital, there was incentive, and there was demand. Each stretch of track had a purpose, had a function, and was part of a national goal to stitch the country from end to end. Now, when we turn our gaze to Brazil, the contrast becomes immediately apparent. Here, the tracks appeared in a scattered way. Each region built its own line, almost always financed by foreign capital, with different gauges, different rules, and no kind of national coordination. There was no integrated project. There were only small sections aimed at transporting specific products, like coffee in São Paulo, sugar in Pernambuco, or minerals in Minas Gerais. The Brazilian railway was born as an export service, not as an instrument of integration. The result of this was a fragmented and disconnected network that doesn't communicate with itself. While the United States was advancing with huge corridors, Brazil was accumulating railway islands, isolated stretches where economic interest ended. And when the government tried to unite them, everything ran into obstacles. Created back then, like different gauges, different concessionaires, different priorities, and many things all stuck because of a lack of standardization and planning. While the Americans created routes capable of moving tons of cargo for thousands of kilometers, Brazil had stretches that stopped in small towns, with no connection to other regions, no constant flow, no scale. It was a network built without continuity, as if each rail was an individual project and not part of a continental country. It was this contrast that created two completely different realities. In the United States, an integrated web that still drives the economy today, and in Brazil, an incomplete puzzle where many pieces have been lost over time. When we look at the railroad history of the United States, we realize that what drove the expansion was not just the desire to grow, but a simple and powerful technical decision. Standardizing may seem like a small thing, but that's what determined whether a train could cross an entire country without stopping, or if it would get stuck in disconnected stretches, full of transfers, delays, and unnecessary costs. That technical choice shaped not only the railroads, but the very economic development of each nation. At the end of the 19th century, while the American railway network was growing rapidly, a concern arose. Without strict standardization, everything could turn into a mess. Each company had its own construction model, its own gauge, its own rules. To prevent the country from becoming a chaotic mosaic, the American government made one of the most impactful decisions in modern infrastructure. It standardized the railway gauge at 1,435 millimeters, known as the standard gauge. And more than just creating the rule, the country put a massive conversion into practice, adjusting thousands of kilometers of tracks in an extremely short period. This standardization unified the railways. From then on, a train could leave the East Coast and reach the West Coast without changing cars, axles, or locomotives. In this way, all the companies started speaking the same technical language, and parts, tracks, wheels, and technologies became compatible from end to end. The industry was able to produce locomotives and cars on a large scale, reducing costs and allowing for rapid expansion. The wheels began to connect, forming giant transportation corridors. With that, engineering became industrialized. Treated sleepers, high-density steel rails, tunnels excavated with great precision, steel truss bridges, and increasingly powerful locomotives made the American railroad a symbol of modernity and national integration. In Brazil, however, the scenario was completely different. Here, each railway was created with a regional purpose, usually financed by foreign companies, and without coordination among themselves. Each economic group built its section using the most convenient standard, resulting in a patchwork quilt of railways across the country. There were sections with meter gauge, others with broad gauge, and still others with narrow gauge. It was impossible to run continuous trains between states. Each change of gauge meant stopping everything, switching cars, moving cargo manually, or using improvised systems. Lost time, lost money, lost competitiveness. This lack of standardization wasn't only an operational issue, it also prevented the country from creating integrated corridors. And this became evident in the main examples of Brazilian railway history. For example, the North-South Railway, planned to be the country's central axis, was stalled for decades. Sections were built without connection to the next ones. Construction progressed at different paces, and contracts were interrupted. The result was simple: a railway that took almost 40 years to become operational, and even then is still incomplete. In its original purpose of full integration, the Transnordestina became another symbol of delay. Announced as a logistical solution in the Northeast, it has accumulated more than 15 years of construction, route revisions, contractual disputes, and long stoppages. Entire sections still lack tracks, and its economic potential remains locked. The Ferrogrão, vital for moving Midwest goods, remains unbuilt. It faces legal disputes, environmental deadlocks, and political uncertainties that keep the project frozen, despite its logistical urgency. The Estrada de Ferro, 118 connecting Espírito Santo and Rio de Janeiro, has become a symbol of a never-ending project. A lot of studies, a lot of promises, but no real execution. Honestly, this way it's really hard to compare with the United States. But, in light of all this, what would really be the difference if Brazil had followed the same standards already established by the United States? If Brazil had taken the same path as the United States, its reality would be entirely different. With a standardized and interconnected network, we would have created railway corridors capable of transporting cargo and people from north to south, from the coast to the interior, without interruptions. Isolated regions would have become economic hubs, small towns would have grown around stations and logistics centers, and the cost of transportation would be much lower. This would result in more affordable and widely sold food, cheaper fuel, and more competitive exports. Agribusiness would be even stronger, not because of effort, but because of efficiency. The country would spend less money on trucks traveling thousands of kilometers, less money on road maintenance, and less on high freight costs, which make everything more expensive. The national industry would be more competitive and have greater capacity for expansion, and Brazil's population distribution itself would be more balanced, with more opportunities in the countryside and less concentration in the big capitals. In short, we would have built a more integrated, cheaper, faster, and fairer country. The comparison between Brazil and the United States shows that it wasn't geography or the size of the territory that set us apart. It was the choices. We got stuck with regional projects, different gauges, and a lack of national vision. The network was never finished, and the country still pays a high price for that decision. But this story doesn't have to end like that. Projects like Norte Sul, Fiol, and Ferrogrão show that there is still room to build a country on rails. We can still connect regions, reduce logistics costs, and turn Brazil into a railway powerhouse. The past explains our failures, but the future depends on the decisions we make now. Because in the end, tracks don't just move cargo, they move the destiny of a nation. Thank you for watching this video until the end. What did you think of this kind of comparison? Do you think I should bring more content like this, making comparisons of giant infrastructures with Brazil? Leave your opinion here in the comments. I'll stop here. A big hug and see you in the next video.